The penthouse was silent. Not the silence of a house resting. Not the kind that settles over sleeping children or wraps itself around a man reading late into the night. This was a chosen silence. The kind that only comes when someone has made a decision and carried it all the way through. Kang Jaeho stepped through the front door of his Gangnam penthouse at 12 minutes past midnight. His coat was still on. His tie hung loose at his collar. The city spread 40 floors below him through walls of glass, a cold grid of light that had never once cared about anything that happened up here. He did not call out immediately. He stood in the entrance and let the silence land on him the way a verdict lands. No scent of chamomile from the kitchen. No small shoes lined up by the door with the careful precision that was entirely Juno's own habit, not taught but somehow inherited. No sound. Not a breath. Not a page turning. Not the soft weight of another person existing somewhere in these rooms. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe, and really I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. He moved through the apartment the way a man moves when he already knows. The kitchen was spotless. The living room untouched. He walked down the hall and stopped at the door to his son's room, and he stood there for a moment with his hand on the frame before he went in. The shelf was empty. The small wooden box where Juno kept his best stones and bottle caps, gone. The drawings that had been taped to the wall in a crooked, beautiful line, gone. The blanket printed with cartoon tigers that Juno refused to sleep without even in summer, gone. Everything that had made this room a child's room had been removed with quiet, deliberate care. What remained was furniture. 4 walls. A bed stripped to the mattress. On the nightstand, a single white envelope. Jaeho looked at it for a long time without touching it. He sat down on the edge of the bare mattress, this man who ran 3 countries' worth of moving money, who had never once been made to wait for anything he wanted. He sat there in his coat with the city glittering cold behind him, and he did not move. When he finally opened the envelope, there were 2 lines inside. No trembling. No tear stains. Just Yoon Seoha's handwriting, clean and precise as it had always been, the brushstrokes of a man who was raised to believe that dignity lived in how you carried yourself when you had every reason to fall apart. I stayed longer than I should have. I left before our son learned to stay too. Jaeho read it once. Then again. Then he set it down on his knee and stared at the empty shelf across the room for a very long time. He reached for his phone. Found the contact he had never once thought he might need to call like this. Press dial. 1 ring. Then a recording, flat and automated. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. He lowered the phone slowly. Outside, Seoul burned with light that meant nothing. The city went from black to gray to the dull white of a Seoul morning, and Jaeho did not sleep. He sat in the chair by the window in his son's empty room and he let his memory do what it had been trying to do for weeks, which was show him everything he had refused to look at directly. He looked at it now. He made himself. 3 months ago, Seoha had stopped asking when he would be home for dinner. Not with anger. Not with a conversation about it. He had simply stopped asking, the way a man stops checking the weather before he goes out, because the answer had become so predictable and no longer carried information. Jaeho had noticed and filed it away under something he told himself he would address later. Later had never come. 2 months ago, Juno had asked at breakfast why Appa worked so many nights. Seoha had answered before Jaeho could, his voice perfectly even. Because Appa is very important to a lot of people. He had not looked at Jaeho when he said it. Jaeho had taken it as a kindness. He understood now that it was something else, a man quietly teaching his child that the world would not always give you what you needed, and that was not the same thing as the world being cruel. 6 weeks ago, Seoha had cooked for 2 hours. Jaeho had called at 7 to say he would not be home. The kitchen the next morning was immaculate. Not a single dish left out. Seoha had said nothing about it. Now, sitting in the gray light, Jaeho let himself see the photograph that had been sent to Seoha's phone at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. He had not seen it himself, but he knew exactly what it showed, and so he constructed it from memory with the precision of a man being sentenced. A hotel bar in Incheon. His hand at the small of Cha Min-young's back. The angle of his body toward hers. Everything that said what it said. He picked up his phone and called Lim Chong-woo. Find them. His voice was flat. Controlled. The voice he used when the situation had already moved past the point where emotion was useful. Chong-woo knew that voice well. The brief silence before his answer was almost imperceptible. Yes, sir. Jaeho set the phone down. His other hand found his lighter on the side table. He clicked it open. Clicked it shut. Opened it again. He was not aware he was doing it. Chong-woo called back in under an hour. Sir? A pause. Seoha SSI covered his tracks well. Whoever helped him, they knew what they were doing. Another pause, shorter this time, like he was deciding how much to say. He planned this for weeks. Jaeho's thumb stopped on the lighter. By the second morning, Jaeho had every screen in his private operations room running. CCTV from the major transit hubs, Gimpo, Incheon, Seoul Station, pulled and sorted by date. Seoha's bank accounts flagged, traced, and found to be entirely, deliberately empty. Every card cancelled before he left. Every account closed in person over a span of 3 weeks, each transaction small enough to pass without triggering a single alert. Jaeho stared at the pattern and felt something move through him that was not anger, exactly. It was closer to recognition. He had spent 15 years building systems designed to make people impossible to vanish. Seoha had studied those systems from inside the house and built his exit around every single one of them. Park Tail stood beside him without speaking. That was one of the things Jaeho valued about Tail. He understood that some silences were not there to be filled. He set a printed photograph on the desk. Seoha and Juno, taken from a security camera outside their son's school maybe 4 months ago. Seoha had one hand resting on Juno's shoulder and was looking at something off camera, his face carrying that particular stillness that people who did not know him mistook for coldness. Jaeho knew it was the opposite. It was the face of a man who felt everything and had decided long ago not to let the feeling spill out where it could be used against him. Jaeho looked at the photograph for longer than he intended. The family contacts had been contacted and had given nothing. An older cousin of Seoha's in Daejeon. A former colleague who now taught at Yonsei. Each of them had answered questions with the exact same careful blankness that told Jaeho everything. They were protecting him, and they had been prepared to do it. He was going through the financial trace for the 3rd time when Tail moved to the radiator against the far wall to adjust the temperature setting. He stopped. Reached behind it. Pulled out a folded piece of paper. Jaeho looked up. It was a child's drawing in crayon. 3 figures of uneven height. Green grass beneath them, a yellow circle of sun above. Underneath, in the large uncertain handwriting of a 5-year-old who had just learned to form letters, Appa. Dad. Me. Juno had drawn them as a family. He had drawn it, and it had fallen behind the radiator, and no one had found it in time to pack it. Jaeho took it from Tail's hand. He held it for a moment. Then he folded it carefully and put it in the inside pocket of his coat. His encrypted line buzzed. Unknown sender. He read the message once. Stop looking. He's building something you'll never understand. Let him. Jaeho set the phone face down on the table. His jaw was set. His eyes had gone to that place they went when he had made a decision that was not going to change regardless of what anyone said next. He was not going to stop looking. That was never a question. Is Jaeho wrong to keep searching? Or is this the first right thing he's done? Tell us what you think in the comments. The apartment was small. That was the first thing anyone would have noticed, anyone who had seen where Yoon Seoha came from, meaning the Gangnam penthouse with its 40 floors of glass and silence and cold, expensive air. But the smallness of this apartment in Busan's Haeundae district was nothing like poverty. It was chosen. 2 rooms, clean white walls, a window above the kitchen sink that looked out over a narrow street toward a slice of sea. Seoha had hung a single print above the table, a Korean ink painting of water and stone that he had owned since university and that had never once made it onto the walls of the penthouse because the penthouse had been decorated by someone Jaeho paid for that purpose. Here, everything on the walls was his. Han Jisoo had asked no questions when she gave him the contact for the sublet. She had been his closest friend at university, a woman who had watched him fall in love with Kang Jaeho 7 years ago with a particular expression of someone who understood both why it was happening and why it would eventually cost something. She had given him a key and a phone number for the building manager, and one sentence. "Call me if you need anything. I mean anything." That had been enough. Juno adapted the way children adapt when they feel safe with the person they are with, completely, and almost immediately. He had a new collection of shells lined up on the windowsill. He had made a friend in the building, a boy named Wusik from the 3rd floor, and they spent afternoons in the narrow courtyard below in a state of total absorption. Each morning, Seoha walked with him along the Haeundae seawall, and Juno moved ahead in that focused, serious way he had when he was collecting something, filling his jacket pockets with small curved pieces of shell while the sea ran gray and silver beside them. Seoha walked and breathed and let the salt air do what salt air does. He had 3 active remote interpretation contracts. Legal documents, 1 international trade consultation, and a pharmaceutical patent translation that required a specific fluency in both technical Korean and English that very few people could offer. The money was modest. It was entirely his. One morning, walking back from the seawall with Juno's hand in his son asked the question Seoha had been quietly preparing for since the night they left. "Appa, did Dad do something that made you sad?" Seoha looked down at him. Juno was watching him with that precise, calm attention that had always been more Seoha than Jaeho, waiting without pressure, ready to hear the real answer. "Yes," Seoha said. "He did. Is he going to fix it?" "I don't know yet." Juno considered this. Then, "Okay." He went back to watching the ground for shells. That was all. Seoha's chest hurt in a way that was not quite grief and not quite gratitude, and was probably both at the same time. That night, after Juno was asleep with his newest shells arranged on the nightstand, Seoha opened his laptop for the last contract review of the evening. The new inquiry sat at the top of his inbox, timestamped 40 minutes ago. Standard format. International client. The rate was good. He opened it. The client company name was KJ International Holdings. Seoha did not move for a long moment. The screen light was the only light in the room. Outside, the sea made its low, continuous sound. Jaeho had not sent the contract inquiry himself. That was the detail that made it worse. It had been Tail, working from a linguistic profile that Jaeho had built from Seoha's previous freelance history, specific translation pairs, legal sector focus, the particular rhythm of his document work that was as identifiable as a fingerprint to anyone who knew what to look for. The inquiry went through 3 shell company layers before it reached the name KJ International Holdings, and Tail had flagged it as a probable match with 68% confidence. Jaeho had been on a plane to Busan within 4 hours of the confirmation. He came alone. No security rotation, no tail, no black SUV with tinted windows. He understood, on some level he had not fully examined yet, that arriving in Busan the way he arrived anywhere in Seoul would be exactly the wrong thing. He wore a coat with no visible label. He took a taxi from the station. He moved through the Haeundae district in the late afternoon with a single photograph and the controlled patience of a man who was used to finding things that did not want to be found. What he did not account for was that Seoha had people here. Han Jisoo saw him first. She was at the market 2 blocks from the apartment when she recognized him from the photograph Seoha had quietly shown her 6 weeks into their arrival, not as a threat briefing, just as, "If you see this man, I need to know before he sees you." She called Seoha without hurrying, paid for her groceries, and walked home at a normal pace. Seoha received the call, looked at the time, and sat very still for approximately 30 seconds. Then he moved. He packed a bag for Juno with the efficiency of someone who had thought through this exact scenario, because he had. He called Han Jisa back and asked her to meet them at the corner, and he walked Juno to her apartment 2 buildings over with a story about a special sleepover that Juno accepted with the cheerful confidence of a child who trusted his Appa completely. He kissed Juno's forehead. He told him he would see him in the morning. Then he went back to the apartment. He sat down at the table facing the door. He did not pace. He did not prepare a speech. He put a glass of water on the table because it gave his hands something to have done, and then he folded them in his lap and waited. The knock came 40 minutes later. 3 times. Measured. Seoha stood. Crossed the room. Opened the door. Kang Jaeho stood in the hallway, coat slightly damp from the evening mist off the sea, looking at him with the expression of a man who had rehearsed 100 things to say and found that none of them worked now that he was here. He looked, for just a moment, the way he had looked in a hospital waiting room 7 years ago, before he had learned to close everything back up again. Either of them spoke. The silence lasted long enough to be its own kind of conversation. Then Seoha stepped back. Not to let him in. To create distance. To put space between himself, and how easy it would be to let this go wrong in the direction of forgiveness that was not yet earned. His voice came out quiet. Even. The voice of a man who had decided everything before the door opened. "You should leave, Jaeho. I'm not ready for this conversation yet." He closed the door. That is the end of part 1. If you are not subscribed yet, now is the time, because the next chapter brings the moment that will break you in the best way, and you do not want to miss it. See you there. He left. That was the thing no one who knew Kang Jaeho would have believed. He stood on the other side of a closed door in a narrow hallway in Busan, and he left. No demand. No override. He walked back down the stairs and out into the evening mist, and he got into a taxi alone, and he went to his hotel. And the fact that he did this, that he was capable of doing this, was perhaps the first genuinely new thing he had done in 7 years. The hotel room was clean and impersonal and nothing like anywhere he usually stayed. He sat on the edge of the bed in his coat for a while. Then he took the coat off. Then he sat there some more. The call to the front desk came at 9:30. A staff member knocked and handed him an envelope with the careful neutrality of someone who had been given specific instructions about how to deliver it. Jaeho looked at the handwriting on the front. It was not Seoha's. It was Juno's. He opened it in the elevator. He read it standing in the corridor outside his room because he did not want to be sitting down when he read it, though he could not have explained why. Inside was a drawing, crayon, the same confident chaos of color that Juno brought to everything, and a letter written in the large, effortful handwriting of a child who was very serious about getting each letter right. "Dad, Appa said I could write to you if I wanted to. I want to. I miss you. Are you okay? Appa cries sometimes when he thinks I'm sleeping. Don't tell him I said that." Jaeho read it 3 times. The 3rd time, he read it very slowly, like a man making sure he understood the full weight of every word. Then he called Park Tail. "Cancel everything for the next 2 weeks." Tail did not ask questions. That was one of the things Jaeho had always valued about him. "Yes, sir." What followed was not dramatic. It was quiet, and it was long, and it mattered more than anything that had happened in months. Letters went back and forth through Seoha, who read each one before it passed through his hands. He edited nothing. He added nothing. He simply read, and in reading, he began to notice a shift in the way Jaeho's letters were written, the sentences shorter, less certain, the tone stripped of its usual command structure. Jaeho was not performing patience. He was learning it. There was a difference, and Seoha knew the difference. One letter to Juno ended with a single line that Seoha read 3 times before he folded it back up. Tell Appa I said I'm sorry. Actually, don't. That's mine to say. That night, after Juno was asleep, Seoha found a second envelope on the table. Sealed. His name on the front in Jaeho's handwriting. Not Juno's go-between. Not a contract. Just his name, written like it meant something. He did not open it that night. Seoha chose the cafe. That was the first signal, and Jaeho understood it. 3 weeks after the door closed in his face, his phone had registered a message from an unknown number, a cafe name, an address near the Haeundae waterfront, a time. Nothing else. He had not replied. He had simply shown up 20 minutes early and taken the corner table that faced the door, ordered an Americano he did not drink, and waited. The cafe was exactly the kind of place Seoha would choose. Ordinary tables. Ordinary chairs. The kind of light that came from actual windows rather than design intention. No private rooms. No curated atmosphere. No setting that could give either man a power advantage. Jaeho was profoundly out of place in his quiet way, not because he was dressed wrong, but because rooms like this had no infrastructure for a man like him, and he knew it, and he sat there anyway. Seoha walked in at exactly the time he had specified. He was wearing a dark green coat Jaeho had never seen before and a shirt with no label visible, and he looked, and this was the word that arrived in Jaeho's chest before he could stop it, he looked like himself. Not the version of himself that had existed inside the penthouse, which had always carried some invisible tension, some permanent bracing. This was a man who had been living inside his own life for 5 months, and it showed in the way he moved. He sat down across from Jaeho. He did not say hello. He ordered tea from the server without looking at the menu. Then he looked at Jaeho and waited. The conversation that followed was the most honest one they had ever had, which was an indictment of 7 years. Seoha did not shout. He did not weep. He asked questions with the precision of someone who had spent months deciding exactly which ones mattered and was not interested in wasting either of their time on the ones that didn't. He asked about Cha Min-young. He asked how long. He asked who else knew. Each question landed flat and clean, and Jaeho answered each one without deflection, which was also new. Then Seoha asked the question that sat underneath all the others. Did you love her? Jaeho was quiet for a moment. Not evasive. Just making sure he answered correctly. No. I was afraid of how much I needed you, and I chose something that didn't require me to be vulnerable. That is not an excuse. That is just what happened. Seoha absorbed this. His face did not shift the way a lesser man's face would shift when given the answer he wanted. He just sat with it. Then, what are you willing to change? Not for me. What are you willing to change for Juno? Jaeho opened his mouth. His phone lit up on the table. Park Tail. He silenced it. It lit up again immediately. And again. The color did not leave Jaeho's face. But something behind his eyes went very still. He looked at the phone for exactly 1 second, then at Seoha. I need to take this. The black SUV had been parked across the street for 11 minutes before Seoha noticed it. He noticed because he had learned, in the years of living alongside Kang Jaeho, to notice things like that. Parked vehicles with no visible driver. Men who stood in one place for too long. The particular stillness of surveillance dressed as ordinary city life. He had always noticed. He had simply, for a long time, told himself it was not his problem to manage. Jaeho came back from his call in under 3 minutes. He sat down. His voice, when he spoke, had changed registers entirely, quiet in the way that meant the opposite of calm. He told Seoha what was happening in 3 sentences. Cha Min-young's father? The rival syndicate head, He had learned where Jaeho was, had drawn the worst possible conclusion about why, and had sent men to collect what he imagined was leverage. Before Jaeho finished the third sentence, Seoha had his phone out. He called Han Jisoo. 4 words. Is Juno with you? The answer came back immediately. Yes. Seoha put the phone in his pocket. Jaeho watched this happen. He had been about to tell Seoha to call someone to confirm the child was secure. He closed his mouth. Seoha had already done it. Had done it faster than Jaeho had reached the instruction. Something in Jaeho's chest moved in a way he did not have a name for. Stay here, Jaeho said. He went outside. He made 2 phone calls standing on the pavement in the gray Busan afternoon, his back to the cafe window, his voice too low to carry. The first call lasted 90 seconds. The second lasted 40. When he came back in, the SUV across the street was no longer there. He sat down. The cafe was warm. The tea in front of Seoha had gone cold. Either of them spoke for a moment. Jaeho's hands were resting flat on the table, not folded, not moving. Just resting. And Seoha could see, for the first time in 7 years, what those phone calls cost the man who made them. Not in fear. In the knowledge of what he was. What he had always been. There was no version of Kang Jaeho that did not have that weight on him, and there never would be. Seoha had always understood this intellectually. Seeing it land on his face was different. Is it over? Seoha said. For now. That's always the answer with you. I know. The silence that followed was the heaviest one they had shared since the door. Then Seoha said his name. Jaeho. Not Kang Jaeho. Not a title. Not a correction. Just his name, said quietly, in the voice of a man who had not been sure he would say it again, and was now not sure what it meant that he had. Jaeho looked at him. Neither of them looked away. Seoha stood up first. He left money on the table for the tea. Then he looked at Jaeho and said simply, Walk with me. They went to the seawall. It was the same path Seoha walked every morning with Juno, the same stone railing worn smooth by years of sea wind, the same rhythm of waves below that never got louder or softer, just constant, like something that had decided long ago to keep going regardless of what happened on the shore above it. Seoha walked the way he always walked here, with his hands at his sides and his face toward the water, and Jaeho walked beside him and did not speak. He understood, without being told, that silence was what was being asked of him right now. The ability to be quiet beside someone without filling the quiet with himself. He had not always known how to do that. He was learning. Seoha talked. He talked about Juno, about the shell collection on the windowsill that had grown from 7 pieces to 63, about the friend in the building named Wusik, about the school where Juno had, after 2 cautious weeks, decided his teacher was acceptable and his classroom was good. He talked about the interpretation work, about the pharmaceutical patent that had taken 6 weeks and taught him 300 words in technical English he had not known before. He talked about the morning walks, the salt air, the smallness of the apartment that had never once felt small. Jaeho listened. All of it. He did not offer comments. He did not reframe anything toward himself. He just received it, and the receiving of it was visible on his face in a way that Jaeho's face had never really been visible before. Then Seoha stopped walking. He turned and faced the water. The sky above the sea had gone the particular dark blue that comes just after sunset, and the surface below it was moving and dark and continuous. I don't hate you, Jaeho. His voice was steady. I stopped waiting to hate you because it was never going to come. What came instead was something worse. I just understood you. And I was so tired of understanding you at the cost of understanding myself. Jaeho stood beside him. Close, but not reaching. What would it take? Not to come back. Just, what would it take for you to believe I see you? Finally. All of you. The question sat in the air over the water for a long moment. Start with Juno, Seoha said. Build something with him that doesn't go through me. If you can do that, if you can just be his father without making it about winning me back, then I'll know you've changed. And if I do? Seoha turned and looked at him. Fully. The way he had not let himself look at Jaeho since the door. Then I'll still be here. Jaeho reached into the inside pocket of his coat. He brought out something folded, worn at the crease from being folded and unfolded too many times. He held it out. Seoha took it. Opened it. Crayon. 3 figures. Green grass. A yellow sun. Appa. Dad. Me. The breath that left Seoha's body was not quite a sound. It was just an absence, the collapse of the last thing he had been holding rigid in his chest for 5 months. His throat tightened in a way that had nothing to do with weakness, and everything to do with the specific grief of being known by someone who almost didn't deserve to know you. Jaeho had kept it. Through everything. It had been in his coat since the morning Tail pulled it from behind the radiator. He had carried it like a reason. 8 months passed the way recovery passes, not dramatically, but steadily, in increments that were only visible looking back. Jaeho restructured. Not publicly, not with announcement, but in the way that men who built things from the inside out also dismantle them, methodically, quietly, without performance. He stepped back from the syndicate's operational control and handed the daily movement of it to men who had been ready for that responsibility for years and simply never given it. He closed 2 alliances that had always been more liability than asset. He did not explain his reasons to anyone. He did not need to. Every weekend, he came to Busan. He did not come to the apartment. He came to Juno's world, the school plays where Juno performed with the absolute seriousness of a child who had decided this was important, the Saturday market where Juno navigated the stalls with the focused authority of someone who had very specific opinions about which vendor had the best fish-shaped bread, the seawall walks where Juno filled his pockets and talked without stopping and occasionally took Jaeho's hand when he wanted to point at something far away. Jaeho carried things when asked. He listened when spoken to. He showed up every single weekend without once making it about anything other than being there. Seoha watched from a careful distance that slowly, over months, stopped feeling necessary. The interpretation work grew. The international legal consultancy had reached out in late autumn, a Seoul-based firm, established, handling cross-border corporate cases that required exactly the kind of precision linguistic work that had always been Seoha's particular skill. The offer was more than he had expected. The role was entirely his own, built on nothing anyone had given him, earned through work he had done alone. He accepted it on a Tuesday morning, sitting at the small kitchen table with the window open and the sound of the sea coming in, and he allowed himself, quietly and without anyone watching, to feel proud. The day he told Juno, his son nodded with complete confidence, as though this outcome had never been in question, and said, "Can we still do walks?" "Every morning," Seoha said. "Even in Seoul." Juno considered this. "Okay. But I'm bringing my shells." The last evening of the last weekend before the move, the 3 of them were on the seawall. The light was low and golden, the kind of light that makes ordinary things look like they were always meant to be painted. Juno was ahead of them, crouched at the railing, entirely absorbed in something he had found wedged in the stone, a piece of shell with a particular curve that he had apparently been searching for specifically. Jaeho was beside Seoha. They were not talking. They had spent enough time together over these 6 months to have learned that silence between them no longer required management. It could just be what it was. Seoha looked out at the water. Then, without planning it, without deciding it in any conscious way, he moved his hand. Just the back of his fingers. Just a brush against Jaeho's hand beside him, light as the sea wind, deliberate as everything Yoon Seoha had ever done in his life. Jaeho did not move. Did not speak. He simply turned his hand over. Seoha's fingers settled into his palm. Down the seawall, Juno glanced back. He saw them. He held Jaeho's gaze for exactly 1 second with the expression of a child who had long ago decided how this story was supposed to go, and was pleased that the adults had finally caught up. Then he turned back to his shell. "Don't make me regret this," Seoha said. Jaeho's hand closed gently around his. "I know what it costs." A pause. "This time I know." The drawing is framed now. It hangs on the wall of an apartment in Seoul that is larger than the one in Busan and smaller than the penthouse in Gangnam, and it fits 3 people exactly right. 3 crayon figures on green grass beneath a yellow sun. Appa. Dad. Me. It is the first thing you see when you walk through the door. If this story moved you, if any part of it landed somewhere real, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. There are people in your life right now who would feel less alone knowing a story like this exists. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next on this channel, because there are more stories where this one came from, and every single one of them is built for people who feel things deeply. Leave a comment below and tell us what this story meant to you. We read every one. We will see you in the next one.